Welcome to Talent Talks with Rekroot. On today's episode, we welcome Kathy Reid for the State of the Financial Services World. Kathy is the Vice President of Client Success at LIMRA, a worldwide research, consulting, and professional development organization that helps insurance and financial service companies increase their marketing and distribution effectiveness. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Welcome back to Talent Talks. Today we are speaking all about financial services and statistics and all about what we can provide in a black and white manner, not necessarily, all of our feelings around financial services and being a financial advisor. So Kim will start us off with talking to Kathy, and we will get into all the different topics with LIMRA.
Great. Well, welcome to our guest, Kathy Reid. Thank you for being here on the show.
Happy to be here. Good to see you.
Kathy, we have known each other for quite some time. It has been a true honor, and you've just been such a great friend throughout this entire journey of just Rekroot and everything in, partnerships and all that fun stuff. So certainly really appreciate you being here and just sharing your insight to our audience. And I'm sure that they will find it very helpful. So excited to get into it.
Sure.
Kathy, first, why don't you go ahead and share with us a little bit about your background and, why you're excited to be here today.
Absolutely. Well, I'm always excited to spend some time and connect with both you and Morgan and our friends at Rekroot. So I have been with the LIMRA and LOMA organization for over 30 years. I won't get any more specific than that, but it's been a long time. It's been the vast majority of my career. My career actually started pretty quickly out of college with a role in the industry as an agent. And I very quickly learned that I loved the financial services industry. I loved everything it represented, what it does for people. However, the sales role of an agent or advisor just wasn't something I was cut out for. So I kind of networked my way around and found myself landing at LIMRA 30 years ago, a little over 30 years ago, where I started off working in the research area. So LIMRA at its core is a research association specifically for financial services and insurance companies, and we're a global association. And all of the work there that I did when I first started was all really centered around talent. It was always about recruiting trends, and we used to do something called the census survey. How many advisors were there in the industry, and how was that broken up by distribution system? I then proceeded to get a master's degree in organizational behavior, which really suited me and helped me find my way within the organization over to the team that worked on assessing talent. And that really very quickly became something I was fascinated with and that I really have spent the rest of my career at the organization focused on. I've headed up our product area, focused on assessing talent, recruiting people into the industry. And now I head up a group of people that are called Client Success, and we work with all of our members that use our assessments and our other talent-related solutions to ensure that they're getting the most value they can out of them, that we're helping from a strategic perspective with their recruiting strategies and distribution growth and all those kind of people-related facets of the industry. So I absolutely am passionate about that. I love what I do. I love the people I do it with, and I love working with our industry partners like Rekroot.
So as part of your role now, Kathy, do you ever do presentations specifically with the people who give out the assessment to help them understand it a little bit better? Or tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, absolutely. So it is probably the number one thing that I enjoy most about my job is I still get to go out and work with our member companies who use our assessments and help them understand what the feedback information is that they get after using, one of our many assessments on a candidate. How do they interpret that information? We also work, and I do a lot of presenting with companies on creating an ideal candidate profile. What does the ideal candidate coming into your organization look like? And where do you find those types of people? And what skill sets should they be bringing to the table? What can you train them to do? do? What should they have on day one? That type of thing. So anytime that I have the opportunity to work with individuals in the industry, whether they be recruiters or field leaders or home office personnel in charge of distribution, for example, I snag those ups because I just love being out there and talking about this stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So if there were, here's one thing when I was in the field. Okay,
Yep.
first of all,
Yep.
heard me say this before, that assessment was a thorn in my side.
Yeah, always. It's a thorn in most people's sides.
And I don't think I valued the assessment until I really knew more about it, which unfortunately was for the most part after I left the field.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I think that could be a common thing that's happening right now, especially with recruiters or quite frankly, even sales managers who have the responsibility to recruit. And I think it's just, there's so many people administering this with your membership companies that how do you get out and educate and do all of those things right for them? However, we don't need to talk about how to do that, right? But this is why you're here today, and certainly just want to kind of dig in a little bit to that. Okay, so my first, probably most important question for you, Kathy, as we're looking at all of this and getting started into this conversation is, why do you think that assessments such as LIMRA and the Right Choice, I don't know if some other companies are still using CP, why is it so important to administer that test in the interview process?
That's a great question. So when we look at the process of bringing in new talent into the industry, and it's actually not only new talent, it's experienced or inexperienced advisors or agents or financial professionals, will use a more generic term because everybody seems to use something a little bit different. We feel it's really important to get a holistic view of what that candidate's success potential is, how they best learn and develop, what their propensity to pass a licensing exam might be. There's a whole bunch of different characteristics of an individual that they bring to the job, and there's a bunch of characteristics that are needed for success on the job. And no matter how long or how confident a recruiter or a field leader or a sales manager might be in their gut and what that might tell them about an individual, there's an awful lot of time, a lot of resources that go into the overall selection process. So our assessments, when they're used appropriately, and it is certainly a challenge to make sure that everybody knows how to use them appropriately. That's that training question you were just asking about. But using the assessments gives them a scientifically data enhanced perspective and sense of how well that candidate's going to do on the job. And that's something that if we can bring that to the table from an assessment perspective, and then allow the recruiter, the sales manager, other people who are involved in the selection process to put more color around that with their own instincts, knowing how they have training processes and what those are, and coaching and mentoring and all those kind of pieces of the puzzle, then you have a higher chance of bringing in a successful candidate. So the role of an assessment, there should never be, and this is our philosophy and everything that we build and what we do from assessing talent within the industry. Our philosophy is there should never be a single assessment that is the defining answer as to whether or not you move on with individuals. That has to be part of what the sales manager or the recruiter brings to the table. A lot of companies use various assessments and they use LIMRA assessments to be a go, no go, but there's also that aspect that the sales manager has to contribute because they know their business the best. They know their business and how their process works. So it's always like a nice combination of the two. It's really the manager or the hiring agent that really has to make that determination of moving forward. So that's kind of how we view assessments. We feel that assessments can be used early, midterm, even post hire or contract based on what kind of assessment it is. If it's a developmental assessment, there's fantastic resources that we can bring to the table to help all along that entire continuum.
What I'm hearing you say with that, sorry, Morgan, I just want to make sure I'm clear. What I'm hearing you say, Kathy, is this is not the end all be all, your yes or no decision maker. It is pretty much helping you make that decision.
Contributory. Yeah.
Yep, but also helping you understand the risk that you're taking
Yep.
when making an offer or not offering a candidate, because we hear often, oh, I got a 1 on the CP, or I got it. I mean, maybe not a 1, but like I failed the CP, but I'm doing really well. So I don't really believe
Yep.
it.
Yeah.
And I think that's just a matter of, well, yes, you could have, but there's many other aspects to the recruiting process to help you make that decision. So
Yeah.
just want to make sure I heard you correctly.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really comes down to the law of large numbers, right? So, we say that you can't select from a pool of one, right? That's not selection, that's called desperation. So if you've got a pool of a bunch of candidates and you use, say, the career profile or our success predictor as an assessment, that's going to help you kind of prioritize who has a greater chance of succeeding out of that pool of people. And if you want to spend your time with people who have the lowest chance of success, that's on the recruiter or the sales manager. I mean, personally, my time's valuable. And if I was in their shoes, and I have been in their shoes, I would want to spend my time on people that have a greater chance of success, because I also know everything else that we bring to the table to help them be successful once they're on board. So really, I mean, I can tell you, Kim, I have been in front of many, many audiences where the first row is full of people who scored very low on one of our assessments, and they are vocal about that. And the irony, the irony is that when I came into the industry, I took the career profile eons ago, and I scored very low on it, and they went ahead and brought me in, and I was not a success. I was a failure. So I kind of wish now, being on this other side, that they had really listened to that, kind of saved me the stress of going through that. So it's always ironic when I hear these individuals in the audience who are clear to raise their hand and say I was that exception. And they're absolutely right. There's always going to be an exception. The horse with the lowest odds is going to come in, in the race first or second a handful of times. But the amount of times they do that is far less than your horses with the best odds. So
do you advise your clients when to give assessments?
yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because every type of assessment has a place. It has a specific place where it's most valuable in the overall process. And a lot of times we'll hear that, take the career profile, which is probably one of the more well-known assessments that we offer. They'll administer that after they've fallen in love with the candidate, after they've gone through the majority of their selection process, and then the candidate won't do well on it. And those are the kind of things that happen where people get very frustrated. Whereas the career profile is designed to be used much earlier in the process, before you fall in love with a candidate, before you continue through much of the rest of the process. So then you're spending your time in that process with candidates who have a greater chance of being successful. So when used appropriately, the statistics, and this happens with every single company that we've worked with that uses our assessments and then participates in our validity studies. The amount of times that those individuals are survive longer, they produce in the top half of their class within that organization, those are always higher numbers. And so that's the return that companies get to see when it's used appropriately across the board.
Right. And do you find that most people are using it appropriately in terms of the position of it?
Yes and no. It really depends on the company. I've worked with individual companies where they are very consistently using it right, and they know what's right. And we've worked with companies where, maybe we weren't able to get in front of them to train, or we did it a few years ago. And, turnover with recruiters in the industry is very high. So as soon as we go out and for some of our larger clients and we do a training session for recruiters, by the time we're back in Connecticut, half of them have turned over already. So, we haven't cracked that nut. We've recorded things, we've sent them out, but so it's really a mix based on the company and kind of their internal processes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
When you mention validity, study validity process, what is, for short second, what is that?
Sure. So again, going back to the roots of the organization as a research association, we have a research team. It is led by what's called she's an industrial organizational psychologist. So she has spent her career developing assessment tests and doing ongoing validation. So validation for us is when we have somebody using one of our assessments, we work with them to collect, in the case of the career profile or success predictor, productivity and retention, survival data, where we can match that back to how the individuals did on the assessment to predict how well it's working, essentially. And we find over the course of time, some questions that are heavily predictive of somebody's success may change. And we have to go back and adjust how those are weighted or scored in the assessment. So this overall process that we bring to the table is very unique. We offer it as a free service for companies that use our assessments, and that allows us to demonstrate return on a company's investment. We can tell them low scorers have this type of average productivity, high scorers have much higher productivity, but we can only do that when we collect data in partnership with them. So that's what we spend a lot of our time doing.
Okay.
Well, that's going to give you a lot more support, I would say, even from the field once they know, all right, so this is actually what our company is doing versus just in general and things like that.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. And I really hope the membership companies take you up on that, because I know
a lot of them do. And one of the challenges that we have is that the value of the findings from these studies get delivered to the home offices, but rarely does that information get filtered down to the people that it can impact the most. So you get those individuals in the front row saying, I got a 2 and I'm an MDRD top of the table. But so that's always one of the struggles. It's communication. That's what it comes down to. So
yeah, for sure. And so if you're a recruiter or sales manager listening to this, I would encourage you to talk to your home office, really probably director of recruiting or something along those lines, to see if those studies are available. And, that way they can certainly send that on over, because that will be helpful to more so get buy-in from the assessment. Instead of just looking at a score, looking at a red, a green, a yellow light or anything like that, you're going to be a little bit more invested in it, because it's worth your time really to look at it.
Yeah, it's always so great when we're doing presentations or we're meeting with our members, at an industry event, even, maybe something Fonseca puts on, when we have individuals come up and say, hey, I saw the results of our validity study, or the study that, however they might describe it, they don't always use the word validity. And it's great because that data is specific to that company, right? It's not an industry number. It's not generalizations across the industry. It's for this specific company. Here's how it's working. So I think that just is a feel good, a feel good piece of information that helps.
Yeah, for sure. So one common question that I think some of our clients and people that we've talked to in the industry consistently ask us when we're going out there and saying, assessments, they're great. They really will help you. And, then of course, there's always going to be the one-off questions. So a few of them have always been, well, how does LIMRA really keep up with the latest trends of recruiting? Yep. For example, COVID, people, or, Generation Z, millennials, they switch their jobs a little bit more because that is just more common than what it was, 50, 30 years ago, things like that. So tell us, Kathy, how does LIMRA really stay up to date with trends for recruiting?
So there's a couple ways that we do that. We just kind of touched on one of them, right? The validity study, where we can look at this industry data, because we have a number of companies that participate in it, and look at what trends might be, like, are sourcing trends changing? Are the attributes of successful candidates and the characteristics that they have, are those changing over time? So we do that within the product team that our psychologists and our research area is. The other thing that we do 2 other things. One of them is within our research group, right? So going back to LIMRA as an association, a research association, we are constantly conducting surveys. One of our most popular, or more popular, at least in my opinion, surveys surveys is our recruiting trend survey. So every 6 months, we're reaching out to our membership and looking at by distribution system. So we look at agency building companies, multi-line property casualty companies. We look at the Canadian companies because they are certainly a little bit different, a lot of similarities, but some differences. And we collect the number of recruits and what recruiting trends are going on within those organizations. And we do that every 6 months. We don't publish something every 6 months. We do for participants of the surveys, but that's one of our big benchmark surveys that we do. The research area also looks at productivity and survival data and just a whole litany of different facets of recruiting and retention within the industry. And one of the things that my specific team is responsible for is we have a group of individuals on our client success team. They're called member solutions directors, and they engage with every single client that we have. And they do that at a home office level from a strategic perspective to learn about what their strategies are going forward and how are things going and what are their hot topics. You know, is it recruiting women? Is it teaming? Those are some of the popular things we hear very frequently. You know, diversity and inclusion and how are companies growing in that space? What are the recruiting trends? How does recruiting look compared to X, Y, and Z? So we have a lot of different ways and means of getting out within the industry to really learn about what's going on and keeping ourselves on the pulse of what's on the minds of our membership.
When you look at the research and it comes out, is there anything that surprises you when it comes out, whether it be year after year in consistency or just overall something that's a little more interesting that you haven't seen before?
That's a great question, Morgan. I think when I look back over, I don't know, maybe the past 10, 15 years or so, because I've been here long enough to be able to do that, what surprises me most is how consistent things are. And how, as much as we all talk about the importance of recruiting and bringing new agents and advisors into the industry and growing distribution, and how little we've been able to succeed at that. We talk about the need to bring more women into the industry. Those numbers have remained flat. We talk about, you know, just all these facets of recruiting, but when it comes down to the data, and we look at like a constant group of companies, so where, you know, our research and analytics teams are really good at what they do. I mean, things have been flat to slightly going down. The most recent data that I saw shows a little bit of an uptick in 2023 recruiting trends in the industry. But it's nowhere near back to what it was like in 2011, 2012, back then. So as much as things change, we haven't done as an industry much to change. And I think that is still the question on a lot of companies' minds, like how can we grow? How can we improve? How can we improve 1st and 4-year retention? And there was no silver bullet to that. We've got some of the biggest and brightest minds in the industry trying to figure it out. And there really hasn't been a solid solution that's helped. You know, companies are looking at things like teaming and you know, different recruiting programs. But even compensation, right? Compensations are really tough nut to crack. The roles of different individuals in the recruiting process, the process itself, do we shorten it? Do we lengthen it? If we shorten it to ensure we're not losing recruits to other industries, we're shortening kind of the process and kind of being short-sighted. So it's surprising to me that things, as much as things change, they still stay the same.
You know, to piggyback on that, one thing that Kim and I always see, and anytime a client will come to us and say, can you help us recruit? And we're like, sure, we can help. And they're like, where are you finding all of your candidates? And we're like, majority of our candidates are on LinkedIn, but they're passive. They're not active. They're not applying. And people will be like, well, that's what our recruiters are doing. I'm like, well, that's your problem right there, right? We've lost the internal referrals. And I don't know what, you know, LIMRA's exact statistics, and we're not asking you to have that prepared by any means, but it's amazing to me anytime we speak to a new recruiter or even a recruiter, I would say it's been around maybe 4 or 5 years or less. There's no referral culture. There's no asking. Yeah, there's asking. We talk about it.
Yeah.
But if you look at their total count of how many contracts, their percentage of referrals is very slim.
Yeah. And I think, to me, that always surprises me because that again is something that hasn't changed. The quality of individuals in terms of what we look at, like, being successful in productivity measures and things like that. Those referrals or those candidates that come in through warm sources, referrals, whether they be agent and referrals, centers of influence, however they're coming in, but that category of people continue to do far better than your cold source recruits. Now, that's not to say that sources like LinkedIn or other social media type sources can't be or aren't as productive in terms of bringing quality recruits, and there should be a little bit of a blend. But building that culture of referrals, I talked to a gentleman earlier this week actually who has a program where the only thing that they do is personal referrals. So every advisor is required to bring in a certain number, depending on the size of the agency, a certain number of personal referrals in. And those individuals that come in by far exceed all expectations in terms of, first year productivity measurements and things. So, like I said, as much as things change and as much as we all know where your better recruit sources are, we still aren't focusing more on that. So that culture of referrals is definitely a great place to head in terms of directionally with recruiting.
Well, and even looking at that too. Okay, so one part, we're pretty much everything recruiting, as you know, in the field, right? And so one part of our job is to help bring on new recruiters if one so chooses for, for their firm or agency. And there are two different types of recruiters out there. There are the referral recruiter and there's the recruiter. They are two different profiles.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily know, like, yes, the recruiter should be going out there and getting referrals, but if that's not their strength, unfortunately, that's on the MP, the general agent, the sales manager that hired them, because you need to be able to ask the right questions to figure out, are you hiring a sales type of recruiter? Or are you hiring more administrative and reach out, always being on the computer type of recruiter, which two have a very good place in this industry, but you just have to understand, where, when, how, timing should we have each individual on. And, it's just not only that to internet recruit, if that is your sole role in the agency, it takes so much more effort to get the great people because you have
for such little outcome.
Oh my goodness, it's unreal. And a lot of times when, again, we're working with our clients, we're like, it all starts with the source. Where are you going to source? Where are you spending your most time? Because if you're spending your most time in referrals and building that, it's time well spent versus spending 8 hours on the computer, which may give you maybe half the result.
I'd say that's giving some.
If that. So super, super interesting. Do you have any idea of some of those stats from like that, still beyond obviously referrals? But have you found any sort of internet that does work well, or have you guys broken it down? I'm not sure if you have LinkedIn, internet, anything like that.
I don't have them with me, but absolutely. We do have them broken down by things like LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is by far the number one source from a recruiting through that kind of internet social site. And LinkedIn can be good.
Right.
But you get into trouble when you have a recruiter who's looking at like, how many connections does somebody have? Well, it's great that you may have, 500 or 1,000 connections, but how many of those people do you really know? Because
Right.
that's really what's behind the ask, right?
That's the glare effects, right?
Totally the glare factor. You've got that, Kim. Absolutely. And let me circle around and touch on one point that you just brought up that I think is important for people to remember, is that if you're doing cold, or let's not say cold, let's flip it and say if you're doing warm source recruiting and you're using referrals and you're using, centers of nominator or centers of influence or nominators or even existing advisors and asking them to bring in some referrals, it's really, really important. And this can impact the success of this process you may put in place. It's really important that they have a clear ideal candidate profile. So if they don't know what an ideal advisor or agent looks like, and we'll use those terms loosely, it's really hard for them to identify those things, those characteristics in a recruit, right? So using an ideal candidate profile, and we worked with a number of companies. Every year we work with a number of companies on kind of defining or redefining what that might be for them, because it could be different, and it could differ by region, it could differ by agency, it could differ by location. It doesn't really matter. But I think that's a really important piece that a lot of people don't think about. And a lot of companies will say, yeah, we have an ideal candidate profile. And when we dig a little bit deeper and find out, when did they create that? Well, it's, the one that we used 20 years ago or 15 years ago. And, so these things do need to be brushed off. They need to be evaluated at least annually, if not more often. But I think that can be a really useful tool to help in terms of warm referral recruiting.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Kathy, what does the research tell us on more diverse firms and their performance?
In terms of diversity overall?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I have a lot of data on that, or that I'm super familiar with the information behind that. But I do know that diversity is, as it has been for a few years now, a very hot topic. Companies are looking at how to create a more diverse, footprint within their organizations. And those companies that can be successful or are successful at it or are working toward being more successful and achieving whatever goals they may have in place for that, it tends to influence their brand. And candidates appreciate coming into a company that has a positive brand around diversity, and that has, agencies that look like the communities that they're based in, or that it even has diversity amongst gender, amongst things like that. So to my knowledge, that does not impact in any way, shape, or form productivity measures or anything like that. I just think it's such an important thing in today's society to work toward having a very diverse workforce. I do know from a gender perspective, that, like I talked a little bit about recruiting trends being relatively flat, if not decreasing, over the past few years, longer than a few years. That's another thing that hasn't changed is, the number of women as a percent of the sales force. It's still hovering close to 27%, something like that. And look at us, we're 3 women here talking about recruiting, but we're not representative of the industry as a whole. So I think there's a lot more work that we all have to do around diversity and gender and equaling things out within the industry.
Do you see diversity growing on the client side by chance?
That would only be my opinion. I have nothing to back that up, but I would say yes. I just think it kind of mirrors the population, which is clearly more diverse than it ever has been.
Right.
So that would just be my opinion, my professional opinion.
Maybe if that's moving in a right direction, then maybe eventually the recruiting will go in that direction.
I can only hope. I really only hope that that's the direction that it goes in.
Yeah. Well, typically if people have some sort of
Knowledge,
experience, anything like that with financial planning,
Mhm.
you're get a few people that are going to say, oh, what is this? What, what experience do I
Yeah.
have with this? And so, Morgan, I would, just from history and seeing people do that, that's a no-brainer, right?
Yeah.
And
You gotta
Kathy,
start somewhere, right?
yeah,
You gotta start somewhere, and having experience with a financial services products, or, or insurance, or being the
Right.
recipient of proceeds from a policy,
Right.
whatever it might be. It opens people's eyes, right,
Mhm.
to this industry, which I don't think has always had such a great reputation, but I think that's changing. I do, and I feel hopeful that that's going to continue into the future.
Oh, Morgan and I attended a conference maybe about a month ago at this point, and was all women's conference, hosted by Investment News. Interestingly,
Wonderful.
we were invited to come and observe and everything. And the energy in that room was amazing. And we were just like, how can we get more of this? And we are part of the women's group of FinSeca as well. So we tried to attend that. So really love that there's more things like that growing. And I think there's always been some resource out there, but I think they're starting to really gain some traction too.
Yeah.
So that's really exciting.
Yeah.
In sharing that. And maybe if your office, what we've come across is that a lot of offices, unfortunately, just don't have that diversity. And they're like, where do I start? What do I do? Right? Use bigger picture resources that maybe might not be local, and try to figure out, what does your home office do? What does, maybe if you're in a smaller, district office, if that's the way that you're set up, and you have a larger network office, go ahead and see what type of resources that they have and ask around, or just ask for a really strong, diverse, a producer at your company. And can you talk to them? Why did you get into this business? What did you do?
Yeah.
And just educate yourself. Cause I think a lot of times right now, if you're just surrounded by your typical, white male office, and, that's just what it is, you need to expose yourself to other things so you can help bring in more diverse, candidate as well.
Yeah, I don't think it's for lack of wanting to do that. I just think they don't know how. I think you're right on. I think it's very much that people want to grow in their diversity, but they're struggling with, how do we do it, and how do we do it successfully?
And how do you adapt to it a little bit
You bet.
in terms of like the culture?
Yeah, exactly.
We've definitely brought on, in particular, women, and and this was even when I was in the field, and unfortunately they left pretty quickly after. And it just, I don't know if it was culture or what was happening, we didn't get the exact reason, but I think part of that too is inclusivity as well, and making some changes, just little things. So all certainly very important, and all things that can really help the overall feel and culture of the office. So
Yeah. In this industry, it offers, especially in the role of advisor or agent, or financial professional, to be more general, this industry and that role, those roles, we offer so many things that are appealing, or would be appealing, to women. And it's just really trying to embrace that, carry the message forward. It just takes a few to really get moving. So it's
trust me, by seeing that, knowing our industry, women in this industry tend to be extremely successful.
Yes,
and it's really exciting to see, and just seeing again the energy in that room, just real time, just a month ago. There are age ranges of all over, recent college graduate to
fantastic.
People that have been in the industry for many years, and it was really exciting to see. And I think that continues to give hope and everything for all offices to get on board, and trying to be and recruit,
Wonderful to hear. Yeah.
Any last thoughts or anything else, Kathy, that you think is important for our audience to hear about, whether it does come to, hey, if you're using LIMRA, here are some resources that you can check out. Here are, extra tidbits of recruiting when it does come to talent, that you would give. Any last thoughts or words that you'd want to share with the community?
Oh, I could do a whole podcast just on last thoughts, I think. But I've really enjoyed this. It's been great. It's always great to talk with both of you, and to have a group of women talking about these important aspects of the industry, and how we can help the industry as a whole grow. I would just share with, anybody out there who's using our assessments, definitely reach out to us. I wish I knew our email address off the top
We
of my
can share
head.
it in the recap.
That's
So
awesome. That
send
would
that
be
over.
great. Because the tools are only as good as in terms of how you use them. And if you're using them correctly, if you understand what they're trying to do and
Yeah.
what their role is, one of my my favorite things to do, we started off with this, and maybe it's a good place to end up, is one of my favorite parts of my job is to be out there amongst people using our assessments and our tools and just help them in their role. And there's nothing more satisfying, and this happens very frequently, where I'll be able to do a session, whether it be, a big field recruiting seminar or whatever it might be, with one of our member companies. And I have somebody say, where have you been all my life? I wish I knew this 15 years ago when I started using these assessments. So people should just know they're not alone. And, we're here to help. We're here to help with you guys in terms of recruiting, and just keep at it. Know who you're looking for, know who's successful and what that ideal candidate profile looks like. Know and go back to the basics of, recruiting from warm sources and using referrals and creating a culture of referrals. Those are the things that don't change, no matter how long we've been in this industry and for long after we're out of this industry. Those things are still going to be so important. And they have, assessments have a place in the process, and we're here to help in any way we can.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, for your time.
You're
And
welcome. It's been a pleasure.
all
Thank
right,
you.
well, thanks again.
All right.